right. It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight. Just sharing this image as kind of a little introduction and a welcome to you all. And it's a project of mine that I'll talk about a little bit later. I wanted to start just with lots of thank yous. Thank you to Paul and to Carol for inviting me to be here tonight. It's an honor to be here. It's kind of crazy. Just 2 years ago, I started kind of creating this work. So if you were to ask me if I thought I'd be here today, I probably would have said something like this. So yeah, it's truly amazing to be here, and excited to share my story with you guys. I'll start with a little bit of thoughts about the title. I wanted to kind of share where that comes from and what that means for me. And then I will give a little bit more introduction, and then later on we'll dive into some specific projects and work and talk about process and all that good stuff. So for those who don't know me, which is most of you, actually, this title here, Inserting Myself into the Conversation, is certainly meant to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek. For those who do know me, they would probably know that if there was a conversation happening between two people and I was walking by, I'd probably be literally the last person to insert myself into that conversation. So the meaning is definitely a little bit different for me, and it really just refers to kind of the. Oops, I'm sorry. Trying to see my speaker's notes. It refers to when I started creating this work. So I was noticing conversation going on in the design world, conversation going on, across the world, and just certain parts of that I wanted to be a part of. And I had been a designer for many years, and mostly focused on client work and I guess more corporate style design. And so I came to a moment where I just had to take a step back and ask myself, like, what my voice was and what that looked like and how I could be a part of this conversation. So I've always pondered and wrestled with existential questions, but mostly in my own head, I would say. And so this work is sort of a way to express that visually and kind of get those thoughts out into the world. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what took me so long to kind of get started with this work, but I finally realized, for me, I might, as someone who's quieter and kind of a calm personality, I realized that my work, I might not have the loudest voice, but that my work could do some of the speaking for me. This was the moment that I was at, essentially. Like I took a step back and said, what do I want to create, and why do I want to create it? And so one of the things that I love about graphic design and type design is how many different forms it can take, and that all of those are unique to each person, each designer, and how they bring their own context and their own story, and how that becomes part of what they create. And so for me, that's what I needed to figure out, I suppose. And that beginning moment was really kind of informative, I guess, is the word. That moment that I guess we all have, that moment of, if we could create anything, what would that be, and why would it be that way, and where does that come from? And so that's an interesting moment for me of and where I was at, of like, what do I want to create and why, and kind of going through that process. So with that, with where I'm at now, again, I kind of started this just 2 years ago, so it hasn't been too long. And honestly, I feel like I haven't, I've gotten somewhere. I've started to explore my voice a bit, but really just scratching the surface. So there's so much more to learn and ways to grow. But I wanted to share a quick introductory video with you that just kind of goes through some of this work that I've been talking about. Yeah, thank you all. That was the first time I had thought about what sort of music that I would pair in that situation, which is always an interesting process, I think. So that was a quartet song. Let's see. So yeah, up until this point, I was telling someone earlier, up until this point, I'm sort of at my most comfortable, I guess, when I'm creating and kind of thinking about this work, I guess. And I hadn't, up until preparing for this talk, I hadn't taken a step back to kind of ask myself where it's coming from. I was more just in the flow of creating and not always knowing why I was doing it certain ways. And so that's been preparing for this talk has been great to kind of step back and like ask myself where it's coming from. And so it really does kind of go all the way back. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my story and where I come from, and also still figuring out where it's coming from. But this is a start. Yeah, this is my family here. My daughter Karula, my son Ted, and my wife Jenny. I just feel like I have to mention them because certainly when I think of inspiration, it comes, it comes from them. It comes from a lot of places, but it comes from them. And they've also want to thank them because they've been kind of on this journey with me and been patient and understanding of me taking time to kind of create and explore. So thank you to them. Just the fact of being a parent, I think it's, things do change and priorities change, and that is certainly, that certainly happened for me. So certainly one of the reasons that I am making this work is thinking about Ted and Karula, I suppose, and the kind of the current state of the world, and wanting to add my voice to it and see what I can do to help make it better for them, just in a very literal sense. And so to Ted and Karula, I would just say, I'm working on it. I'm doing what I can. So I started out from a young age with a pretty contemplative mind and an interest in existential questions. I did grow up in a Christian tradition, and faith and spirituality were part of my life from a young age. After studying, so as Paul mentioned, I did study religion, and first at University of Oregon, and then went on to study at University of Oxford. And I think that process, when I started started studying religion and world religions, and also traveling, having the opportunity to travel and meet people across the world, I think it was, my idea of faith and God and all of that quickly changed, and became something quite different. So while I don't practice religion in that sense, I always have still maintained the thinking and the questioning and the exploring on that level, for sure. So this is a journal. I was back at my parents' home in Portland, Oregon this summer. They have like a stack of keepsakes that they've kept for me far too long. But I found this journal, and I have probably a stack of them, not a ton, but a handful from high school and college that are filled. And what they're filled with is really, kind of hopes and dreams for the world, I guess. So this is from 1997, which for me would have been sophomore year of college, I believe. And so I share this just because a lot of the work that I'm creating, I think, comes from that place of hopes and dreams for the world, is really kind of the previous slide that said subject matter. I think that's where this kind of subject matter is coming from, but then also the fact that subject matter matters for me and how I create. So this is me as a baby with my mom. This would have been around 1978 or so in Portland. Diego is here. Diego is a designer, a new friend of mine, and I shared this talk with him, shared the outline with him, and kind of asked for his insights, and he kind of asked. I asked him what he thought of my work, and he said that there was a gentleness to it and kind of a quiet spirit, and he asked where that came from. So I think the gentleness and the quiet spirit in many senses comes from my mother. I think for her, the first word that comes to mind is nurturing. She has loved our family very well, and she has a calm, gentle spirit, for sure, but she was always passionate about instilling, I guess, morals and kind of understanding how to make the right decisions, or as best as we can. And so for her, another aspect of how subject matters, for her, subject matter really mattered, and a specific example of that is. If I would ask her, she had a kind of a catchphrase, which was actually a question, if I would ask her, hey mom, can I do something like, can I watch, like if I was too young, maybe I would ask like, can I watch an R-rated movie or something like that? And she would always respond with a question, which was this: will it make you a better person? So I think a bit simplistic. Obviously, life decisions and life is more nuanced than that. But I think for me, there was a bit of parenting genius in it. It gave me a sense of authorship over my own choices, and taught me that what we consume and how we choose to spend our time just impacts the people that we become. So while I for sure haven't lived up to it all the time, the question has stuck with me and is now a part of my subconscious and kind of helps guide what I focus on in life. So thank you, Mom. So here's me with my dad. So the process that I have for some of my work that involves language and simple wordplay, for me, I think what I'm hoping for is that there are some kind of subtle aha moments in there, and that at first glance, you might not see the full concept, or it might take a second to kind of read the title or see what's happening. There's usually a connection there between the language and the visual. So I think some of that comes from my dad. My dad has been in business for different forms of business his entire life, and just has a sort of intuitive knowledge about business, but also life and what really matters, I think. And also a sense of humor, I think, comes from him as well, which, so yeah, I think the little bits of humor and wit and my interests in thinking deeply and making certain connections in my work, I think are inspired by him. So now kind of moving on to how I got into design. I am a self-taught designer. I didn't study in school for design. I studied religion, and then thinking that I was with religion, I was on track, I thought, to be a professor and to teach philosophy and theology. So when I returned from school, it was I was kind of burnt out. Like I went straight to a master's program from undergrad, and so just felt like it was a lot. And then the experience that I had at Oxford was, I was a little bit out of my league, I would say. I was studying with other students some of which were exploring their PhDs and kind of taking a break to do this program, and it felt really competitive, and I wasn't quite ready for it, or I wasn't quite as passionate as I needed to be to kind of continue that road. So when I got home, I went and I had a friend who was studying photography in Southern California, and so I went and stayed for a summer with him, and he immediately mentioned, I need a portfolio site for my photography. And so I went and bought a manual for Flash, Macromedia Flash, and which at the time was the newest, coolest software, and the dawn of interactive design. And so I learned just enough to create a site for him, an interactive site, and by interactive, I mean, oh my sakes, you can make images move in from off screen and fade in and out. This is so cool. Or at least it seemed cool at the time. So then I did what anyone would do in that situation. Almost immediately we started a studio and started working for small business clients. So this was, we were interested in fashion, streetwear brands, and so this was, we kind of made friends, went to trade shows, kind of were interacting with people from smaller startup kind of fashion brands, and so that's what we were focused on almost immediately. Again, we started making websites and catalogs and T-shirt graphics and just anything and everything that was needed for some of these brands. So that for me was really how I learned design, by just kind of doing it. So this is a brand, called Rosasen, which was a golf-inspired brand that I ended up going in-house for and worked at for a few years. But that, again, was really how I learned design, was just by kind of a crash course on throwing myself into it. And so, a magazine ad that I made on the left, and then a simple typographic work on the right. So after a few years of that, this was in Los Angeles, I had an opportunity to move to New York, and kept on with the studio, or the kind of my freelance, I guess, just working with clients directly, and specifically stayed in kind of fashion and e-commerce, working with clients like J.Crew and Warby Parker and others to support design initiatives. So in addition to kind of launching myself into design and the crash course that I had with Rosasen and just like starting my studio and kind of throwing myself into it, I do think there was part of my childhood that sort of prepared me a little bit for it, and I think that instinct is important with design. I think certainly you learn through school, but I think that there's a lot to be said for instinct and how that comes into play in design as well. So an example of that is my father was in publishing for a while, and I do have memories of visiting graphic designers who were working on publications, and this was a while ago, and so it was when designers used drafting tables, and just there was a fascination there with that work, and honestly instantly a fascination with typography and layout in particular, so editorial design and layout and typography. Other examples of that would be kind of a fascination with magazine design also, so editorial design, magazine covers, and just specific memories of I had have an older brother who was into music, and so I have memories of Rolling Stone and Spin and kind of like growing up leafing through those magazines and admiring the layout and type in those as well. Kind of random here, but I also I think like a lot of kids from my generation, I had a period where I collected sports cards, and I do think this was sort of another subconscious or way that design was sort of entering my brain and kind of being filed away for later use, and so this skybox, what I'm showing here, I think is actually kind of like pretty awesome, what they did with trading cards and how kind of innovative it was, and sort of a small thing, but for me it was a big thing because here I'm seeing I was interested in sports and knew all the players and even the statistics, but this for me, seeing the combination of the sports with in this case simple kind of minimal colorful designs was really kind of awesome for me. And again, a way that art and design, even though I didn't study it, it was kind of like coming in inside, Yeah, with the cards, I showed the back here as well. So I think an interesting element here is just that I was as fascinated with the cover of the cards or the front of the cards as I was with the back, and had a particular interest in the back in seeing how organization was laid out and organized, and how that was done in a systematic way was really interesting to me as well. So I think that there's two parts of my brain, in a sense, of like the creative side, and then also this analytic and systematic side that comes to play there. Another example of early memories of mine are with spirograph. So, and there's definite tie-ins, I think, to some of the work that I'm creating, and again, the systematic quality to it. And so, yeah, I have memories as a kid. These aren't my designs, but I did have many hours spent making spirograph artwork. So, yeah, once I started to do design work, once I did launch into it, I guess I feel like I was prepared in a way, even though not having been formally trained. And then, in terms of my process now, I feel like I use the instinct piece, and then also the pieces that came from the academic side, and kind of merge that together in my process as well. So yeah, over the years, I certainly heard a lot of experienced designers. They will say this, and I think it's true, that kind of that graphic design is not a 9-to-5 job. I guess it's like something that you would be encouraged to kind of live and breathe, and a way of looking at the world. So I think for me, I've done a pretty good job with I had been doing a pretty good job as someone who's self-taught with kind of consuming and viewing design, and always I knew that because I was self-taught that I had to spend even more time researching and going to museums, and trying to kind of train my my mind and my thinking. So, but I think where I was falling short was with actually the interacting with the world piece, and adding my voice to the conversation piece. So that's, I guess, what I feel like I'm making up for in a way with this work is, and that's the part that was missing that I'm trying to contribute now. In terms of references for me, there's quite a few. So I just chose a couple here that I think inform two sides of, or two ways that I tend to create. So A.G. Franzoni is true favorite of mine, and I think when I can't remember exactly how or when I discovered his work, but for me, and the process that I have and the visuals that I have in my head, and kind of seeing this, there was a real kinship there, and like a connection there. So he was someone who was really embraced his own design philosophy, and was really someone who also kind of believed that design and what he considered to be good design could change the world. So I liked that. So yeah, process-wise, I mean, I think the black and white here is really interesting, and I guess the restraint that's involved there, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well. And then also the scale. So you'll notice in a couple of the pieces, the scale of the typography is really small. that that for me is really interesting. It kind of makes it seem like for him he's operating in this kind of larger scale world almost. It's kind of hard to articulate, but like that he's operating in this larger scale architectural sort of world that at times even means that the viewer has to squint to read that type, and I think that that's great. So yeah, if you haven't explored his work, I highly recommend it. So yeah, Max Bill, another hero, design hero, for different ways. But for me, I think the fact that he was operating at the intersection of art, architecture, and design is really interesting. So here are geometric prints. What's interesting to me about these, and really, this type of work in general, is the interaction and the interplay of the colors, and really how obviously these are static images, but they have a certain energy and feel alive, just based on the colors and the composition. So that's also really interesting. For me, I gravitate to static images more than moving images, and so I always am interested in static images that can have a sense of energy and that can kind of feel like they're alive. Yeah, so just a fancy word for my process, because I think you're supposed to have that. Radical simplicity really is just means that for me and how I create, I'm choosing simplicity as my form for creating, or my point of view, I guess. For me, in my independent work, simplicity, clarity, and concept, and then subject matter all kind of fits together to be part of this approach, I would say. I think this is I've always had a tendency towards simplicity, but I would say even more so now, and certainly just as my own response to kind of the state of our world. I think I gravitate more and more towards simplicity as a response to kind of what I see as kind of busyness, and sometimes even kind of an overwhelming sort of world. So it's a coping mechanism, I guess you could say. So this was just a simple animation here. So yeah, this was showing nine nines in different typefaces. And the reason that I share this is one aspect for me of radical simplicity is this idea of restraint, and kind of sort of purposefully limiting myself and the choices. And so for typography and making decisions about typography, I purposefully kind of choose from a small number, which just kind of works for me. And again, it's part of that. I think the concepts I'm able to focus on the concepts more when I have fewer decisions to make. So these 9 nines are that's probably actually too many. I think I probably choose from four or five, I would say, for the most part. So I wanted to mention, even though in my own work I tend to use more simple typefaces, for that reason, because I like the concept and there to be a clarity, I guess, to the work. But I certainly have love for all forms of typography, and in particular, I think there's a real love for typefaces that seem straightforward and simple, but then obviously if you take a closer look, there's quirks there and personality there that is really awesome to discover. So I'll share this as another kind of example of radical simplicity and what that means to me. So this is a simple photo that I took on a trip to New Delhi in India, and so I guess what I'm doing here is purposefully working with absence and negative space, which is I think another element of radical simplicity, or what I'm looking for, is to be purposeful and intentional about space and composition, and also taking away elements in hopes of kind of highlighting. So that is also an interesting process of how absence or taking things away can actually shine a spotlight onto the subject, and to help kind of tell the story maybe more clearly than otherwise. So this was the original photo, and then the edited version. So I'll share this as more of a typographic example of what radical simplicity means to me. So the restraint, I guess, is factoring in here as well. But then, and also the kind of some rules about wanting to do things in the simplest possible way, and then see what can be said from that. So purposefully not using many tricks or techniques here, just seeing what I can do with sort of a flat image, but then making things move by the composition and the positioning of the type. Another thing, when I first started creating this work, I was more creating digitally and just kind of sharing things out digitally. Somewhere along the line, it became really important to print. So almost everything I do now, I print it, and then oftentimes I'll scan it or photograph it. But that part has also become a really kind of important part for me of the process. In terms of making something digital, physical, and actually being able to see it and touch it, and the texture. The texture here, for the most part, is real. It's so just scanned at high resolution, so you can see kind of the grains and the ink bleed on purpose, because I think, at least for me, trying to kind of figure out ways to kind of help people feel that concept in an ideal world. So someone could look at this and sort of feel the concept of transcendence. So this was a card that I created for my wife for Valentine's Day. Just from an 80s song. So I think this is sort of, in a way, part of my philosophy also of I think also being self-taught. Like I've always sort of felt this sentiment of like not feeling like I have it all figured out, and so that's always something that's in the back of my head, of kind of like just I guess trying to stay humble and knowing that I don't have it all figured out, which I think also opens kind of opens the door for lifelong learning and kind of evolution of process and yeah. So the kind of the simple Venn diagram that you see there also has become a theme in my work. So whenever I'm working with that style, when there's overlapping shapes or lines, it's for me, it's kind of a way to represent interconnectedness and also a sense of togetherness and solidarity. Posters. So I started out like, so in a way this has been sort of another form of, oops, sorry, another form of education. So because I am self-taught, so I used the poster format to start exploring concepts and how I would translate those into simplicity and radical simplicity and see, and it kind of led to, I think, some of the connection between concept and language and visual. So I'll share some of that work as well. So fishing for compliments. I think it is what it is, fishing for compliments, but it's the simplicity here, it's the composition, it's sort of purposefully kind of like the two colors, black and white, flat, but like just using that and seeing what I can do with those sorts of rules. So common decency thrown out the window. Certainly a response to current events and kind of general feelings about the world. So I think I do. That's another way to tap into self-expression, and something that another way that I kind of felt like I needed to contribute my voice and could do that through some of these concepts. So take your time. These themes of time I've also done quite a bit with. So take your time. This is one of the first designs that I did with that phrase. I've done some others, but and I think where that comes from for me is again, I think like with my sense of the world, it's there's a busyness and kind of like a frenetic pace, and so these concepts that I do around time are really kind of a way for me to sort of add my voice and kind of, I guess, sort of say like, hey, I need to slow down a little bit, or like maybe the world could slow down a little bit as well. So yeah, this I call play on words, and so there's a literalness to that concept, but also I think there's some layers to it too. I think and can be interpreted different ways. For me, this was really about like how words have an impact, and yeah, words have power and meaning and impact. Probably can't read that. So the type here says crashing waves of tenderness, which is a phrase that comes from a novel that I read maybe 10 years ago or so, and I've been searching and searching. I lost track of it. I've been trying to find the book and the author and where this comes from, but it's a phrase that that stuck with me and stuck in my memory, even though the book was lost. I think what's happening here, this is just sort of a different form or a slightly different form of exploration for me, which is to try to push myself towards like a more poetic sort of aesthetic and poetic sort of phrases and how I would interpret those visually, because so much of my other work is well, this is systematic too, but so much of my other work is systematic, and there's sort of some rules and restraints to it, and so I have to try to push myself to I think I try to have like a more poetic quality, or where not everything has to be quite so literal, I guess. And here's another example of that. Just every waking moment. Just a phrase that I think can mean anything, different things to different people. And then this, I kind of was liking this sort of, editorial spread kind of way of exploring, and really kind of just seeing how color and simple form can blend with the type, and honestly to kind of ask the question of like, does that enhance the design or does it not enhance the design, and kind of seeing how that works. So simultaneously, like as I was creating some of that poster work, I was also trying to push myself, into other forms, and that's when I started doing some of the work that I do with repetition. So here's an example of that. So this is the concept of within reason, and for me, I think a lot of explorations that I have are around kind of personality and in a way kind of control, or being in control or out of control, those sorts of things, and also personality and kind of identity as well, and in control and out of control, like this. Center of attention. For me, this is an example of some explorations with repetition and how that can add a sense of motion. So that is, again, interesting to me as well, in terms of how a static image can feel like it's moving. And just, again, for me, I gravitate to this kind of static form. I feel like one of the reasons why is I think for me, I feel like everything is moving, everything is in motion all day, every day, and so it's a gravitation towards static. The moment you can have with a static piece of art or design or whatever it might be, a photograph, and just kind of the stillness that you can have with a static image that maybe you can't with a moving image. Some simple type play here, and just I think this was an earlier work that sort of inspired some of the more recent work that I've done with wordplay, which I'll share in a bit. So here's another example of something done with Take Your Time. So this was printed on an actual time card, and just I think, again, in my work, I'm looking for ways to, hopefully to kind of bring in different layers of meaning. And so for me, this was just another way to kind of add a layer of meaning. So then this work, simple geometric work, I think is a way to balance out some of the type work that requires more thinking, and just have noticed that I sort of vacillate between the two as a way to kind of, I think when I'm in my head and thinking about the concepts for some of the typographic work, sometimes it can be a little much, and so I balance it out with this work. But again, as I mentioned, this work is also really interesting to me in terms of interaction of color and again how static images can also feel like they're in motion and have an energy to them. Just another example. So I did a series with blue stripes, just kind of printing them and then doing various things to them, like folding them and tearing them, just to see what I could create. Stacking them, cutting them and stacking them. And here's a print that was created from that. Another stack. Playing with stencils. And so this is using a stencil formation and actually drawing it in with pencil. So this is digital, and I kind of realized that I wanted to use pencil and kind of see the texture of it, which I think is interesting. And then combining the two forms. So yeah, I was going to mention about these projects were kind of like just exercises that I came up with, self-initiated exercises that would have been done probably 20 years ago in art school, but I'm doing them now since I didn't go. So graphic design as meditation. So again, I think from early when I started exploring, it was clear that that process-driven and sort of the system of how I create was important, or important to me. So I like to see, with repetition, I oftentimes create one form and then repeat it and kind of like take it into another form that creates a sort of texture to it. And again, also I think playing with the idea of static motion and how kind of the layers and the repetition can give a static work a sense of motion. So this was one of the first repetition sort of pieces that I did. It started from this form, and so this definitely relates to hopes and dreams for the world, and that's what I mean, I guess, by meditation, is that for me, the actual process of doing this, of typing out the phrase and copying it and doing that over and over, there's a rhythm to it, and so for me it is sort of meditative and also kind of therapeutic in a way as well. So this started from this, and then just played with simple reduction of the form to create a different form, and then from there copied and rotated and repeated to create a circular pattern. And it ended up being in this form. I printed this and then sent it out to people who asked for it. All-inclusive. This is another hope and dream for the world. For me, the design has meaning, I think, because of, again, the concept and how the concept of all-inclusive ties into the visual. So I think an easy example of that is just like if you were to change the word. So like if this, instead of inclusive, if it was something else, like avocado, for example, like it obviously kind of loses its meaning unless you really like avocados, I suppose. So take your time. Another exploration with that phrase. And similarly here, so this is repetition of empathy. What I liked about this and found interesting was the pattern itself and how it's darker in the middle, and for me it kind of like represents a heart or a heartbeat. So semi-random. This is another series of work that is I enjoy quite a bit, but I'm still sort of figuring out this concept and exactly what I'm exploring. But so sometimes it looks like this. So it's a line study from a stencil structure. So what I was exploring here is the idea of semi-random, which for me is kind of like when you draw. If you're drawing with pencil, I think you draw. There's that connection between your mind and what you're drawing, and so to me it seems like impossible for it to be fully random because there's always that connection. So if one line is drawn, you're conscious of that, and then when there's a thought process that happens when you're thinking about where that second line is going to go. Even if you want it to be random, there's still considerations that you're making, even subconsciously, about where that should be placed. So because I couldn't call this random work, I called it semi-random. And also interested in just, obviously the scale of the circles gets smaller here, so there's something happening with the density of the lines as the circle gets smaller and smaller. Let's see. Just a simple animation. Another keepsake that I found over the summer when I was back home was this overlapping lines. So the overlapping lines, I think, for me also is sort of that concept of interconnectedness, but also solidarity and like how lines pass, and I suppose people's paths in life pass. Another example here of I'm trying to kind of be random with something, but again, it's kind of the idea of semi-random. So, and then seeing how ultimately that comes together. So that's the combination of all 6 forms there. I ended up realizing that I could incorporate type into this as well. And also, I think, kind of fits the concept of semi-random here, about how life, in a way, is semi-random, where we make certain choices that determine our paths, and where our paths cross as well. So wordplay, this is a format of work that I've been creating for a while now. It's where I choose a word, and then I think about its modifiers. So I think about the ways that I can add to it, and specifically, so I'm looking for words that have modifiers that I can translate visually, simply. So I start here with the word, in this case self, and then so self-important. Again, there's the rules here of it's black and white. It's actually only using type, so I don't use other elements here other than just type. Self-absorbed, self-talk, self-destruction, self-reflection, and then I usually end all of these series with an empty slide, in this case selfless. Just another example of wordplay in sort of a different format. So this is introvert, extrovert. And I've kind of recently come up upon this style, which is sort of a very simple diagrammatic style, and a kind of a way of labeling in a way, and also, again, like sort of literal, but sort of purposefully literal, I guess. And open and shut, similar sort of concept. It's open up and shut down. Wanted to share this project with you all. It's so Platt Journal. It's independent architectural journal run by the students of Rice University, and so this was a great project to work on because the theme of the issue was simplicity, and so the challenge was to come up with the cover artwork that was fitting of the theme. It was their eighth issue, so to me it made sense to focus on the number 8, and so this is the finished artwork here with the eight circles, and the inside. So here were some of the explorations. One thing that was a little challenging here was I actually had a different selection. Like, I kind of wanted to go with this bottom left version, because for me, if the theme is simplicity, for me I was thinking about what is the simplest way to represent the number 8. And so for me, 2 circles are more simple than 8 circles. But I also I did like the 8 circles, and I think that was the right choice. I think it brought again a sense of energy and life through the colors and the kind of sense of motion that it has. So here were some of the other explorations. And so solidarity, this is a little bit different for me, and I think this came from like pulling an anchor point of a circle and making it so it wasn't a circle anymore. But the concept that I was thinking of was essentially, you know, for a shape like this, is it like, for me, this is actually more perfect than a circle in a way, because it's not perfect, I guess. And so that's where this kind of concept, it came from that line of thinking. Yeah, really sort of the layers of meaning here with the concept of solidarity. And then so these are meant to be characters that are rocks, so this was the first in the series that I did. I see something in you, I see something in you too, and really that's the simplicity of the concept. It's like we all have something in us, and it would be great if we all, you know, could see that. And then also just having fun with it. So you rock, no, you rock. And then here we introduced Y rock. So originally it was just B rock and G rock, and then Y rock asked if they could join. So sure thing, come on over. Really? You don't care that I'm a different color and shape? Of course not. Your unique shape and color is what makes you amazing. Yeah, we may have differences, but we're all still rocks. And then it's nice to be together. So that was really all I had. I actually have one other slide, but kind of come full circle there, and just wanted to leave you with a final thought. So for me, I'm thinking about like this body of work and where it goes next and what I'm going to do next. So there's a lot on my to-do list, but here's just one thing that I pulled from there that is kind of important to me. So I'll leave you with this thought. Yeah.
Just speak when you so I like learned about you randomly on Instagram.
Yeah.
And you know, you've kind of been designing on computers, it seems like, from the beginning. I'm curious about your distribution channels, like how you bring this work out to the world, share it with the world. What is important to you? What's next? What do you focus on? When it comes to taking this out of your house to your studio?
Yeah. Scratching the surface there, I think. For me, I want to do that, and I want to get more into printmaking, and so that's a good segue, actually, because I meant to mention I have these letterpress cards here. So, which I'd love for all of you to take if you haven't already. One of the first projects that I've done where it's kind of exploring printmaking, and in the same way that I kind of started creating digitally and then transitioned into at least, you know, printing and scanning and kind of bringing it into the physical world that way. I want to take that further and explore more things with letterpress, more things with probably silkscreen and screen printing, and make things available that way. But that's on my to-do list of exploring more tangible and physical ways of creating this work and getting it out there. I do. So I do have a day job. Yeah, as Paul mentioned, I work for a company called Boxed, and it's a design leadership role. So it's yeah, working with various design teams at Boxed, which is awesome, and the variety is great. So I work with packaging designers and branding and marketing designers, and then also product designers. So, but mentioning that because time is limited, I guess. So I do what I can, and I'd love to do more.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a question up front?
Oh yeah, I think that was me.
Yeah.
So in an outside perspective, it seems all, let's call it smooth, like it's so creative, every idea is so fun. I'm just wondering if you like also hit sometimes like a wall.
A wall?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you don't have to force your answer, but.
No. I do. I think so. Yeah, I think for me, some of the work that I create requires a lot of thinking and a lot of kind of processing, and to, I think, create some of those connections. I mean, in one sense, I think it's hard to describe because I think the work is fairly literal, so and simple. But I think, at least for me, I think there's some layers there, and it's not as easy maybe as it looks to kind of create those connections. So it takes a lot of brain power to do that, or again, at least for me, it does. And so I do kind of get a little burnout, and then I'll either take a break from it, or in a way, some of the geometric work that I showed is my way for kind of balancing that out. So not everything has to mean something, and not everything has to have like a deeper concept or meaning. I think it's okay for things to also just exist as forms, and to have that be enough. And so that's a way that I kind of balance that out. Mm-hmm.
Question.
Yeah.
I guess this question ties into what you just said. I mean, you mentioned that a lot of your work is literal intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
but were you ever working on a concept or an idea and you had an idea of what you wanted it to mean or what you thought it meant, and then in like actually creating a visual representation, it sort of, you almost like blew your own mind, like, oh, like I didn't even think about the concept in that way, but representing it visually kind of maybe revealed an aspect of the concept that you just wouldn't have seen otherwise. Yeah, so it's not like, this is my idea, this is what I'm trying to say, here
Mm-hmm.
you go. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm working with this idea, I made this thing, and I learned something about the concept
Mm-hmm.
by making the image. Has that occurred in this work at all?
Not that I can remember. I think for the way that my brain works, I mean, literally with how I'm, the starting point for a lot of this work is an Evernote, file where I phrases or words kind of enter my brain, and then that's literally what happens. It's like there's a filter in my brain that is like, as these concepts or phrases and words enter, I'm sort of scanning them for how I can bring them into these ways that I'm creating, and then writing them down, and coming back to them, when the motivation is there. But I think that's what I'm pushing for. I have to push myself, like what I said with some of the work that feels a bit more poetic. It's like I have to push myself away from the more of the process and systematic kind of form of creating to try to get to that, and it's admittedly a little bit hard. Mhm. Oh, yeah, go ahead first.
Which design is this? Of the typefaces that you use?
Oh, good question. This is Carla. Yeah.
And then I was wondering, when you found those 9 typefaces, was it a physical discovery or digital?
Mostly digital. Yeah, mostly digital. Yeah.
Did you, like, can I ask, like, where? Like, just like, was it just online or?
Yeah, I mean, I started sharing this work on Instagram, and admittedly, like, that's, kind of how a lot of this started, and honestly, like, design community sort of came from that, and yeah, so it's discoveries that way, but also being trying to be a bit more intentional. Like I try to follow and discover, younger designers, and not always the big designers, and to support young type designers for sure. So actually, solidarity here. So this is a typeface called Brunswick Grotesque, which is by Dennis Growell, which has varied widths, and that comes together in what seems to be a random formation. Yeah.
I think a few slides ago you were talking about design as meditation.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if doing all this work affects your daytime job, like the way you think about it and the speed you're doing it, because that must be much faster and deadline driven than this. So has this changed your thinking about your daytime job and that kind of design, and vice versa? Was there any influence?
Yeah. I think at my day job, I'm also thoughtful, and what I mentioned about the concept of taking your time and how that's a reoccurring theme in my work, I think that can be a reflection on the day job aspect of sometimes feeling like the pace, it can be related to work or just the world in general, of just, for me, kind of sometimes feeling like the pace of life is just crazy, and kind of wanting to slow that down a bit. So that does come into play, but I think my strength is my thoughtfulness, I would say, and I try to bring that in to my role at Boxed as much as I can. Obviously, things need to move, and Boxed is still technically a startup, so that culture is a culture that moves quickly, and so there is a bit of a give and take there, but I still try to be thoughtful, and when I have one-on-ones with designers, I think that's my time to kind of like to bring in that thoughtfulness, and sort of I think the goal is even in sort of a more corporate role, that you're challenging yourself to design with meaning and feeling as much as possible. I think that's not always possible with that type of a role, but I think that's the goal, and at least doing as much thinking about thinking and concepting as you can, and that for me comes from my studies. So even with the client work that I do, prior to my role that I have now, it's always in the back of my mind to try and infuse design with some sort of meaning, like however I can, and whatever that might mean, to kind of have it be more purposeful. And again, like that's, if you're designing an email, that's a challenge to kind of like think about how that's going to take form. But I think it's still worth considering. Yeah. Yeah.
When you talked about
the two circle layout and the 8 circle layout,
Yeah.
and that you prefer the 2 circle layout. And I'm just wondering why you decided against it at the end.
The team at Platt preferred the 8 circles, and
Do you know the reason?
I think for the reasons that I mentioned, feeling like there was a little bit more energy there, and thinking about the book which I have here, thinking about the book as an object, and wanting to bring in that energy and kind of a sense of motion. Maybe makes the book as an object more appealing. And honestly, I like this version as well. It was just that sort of design philosophy kind of question of like, or the question about simplicity of like, if simplicity is the theme and we want to be as true as we can to what simplicity means, for me, that means taking away. And so the simplest way to represent the number 8 was with, like I said, with 2 circles instead of 8 circles. But again, honestly, I liked both. Yeah.
Question in the back.
Okay.
No, I was curious, do you ever feel insecure or have self-doubt being self-taught, or do you find that that's free?
Little bit of both. This work, I think, has succeeded, I think, in giving me a voice, which has helped, me feel like I'm sort of more a part of the design and type community now than ever before. So that part has been great. But yeah. Sorry, could you repeat?
I guess not having a formal education
Yeah.
in design, do you have moments where that gives you self-doubt, or is it a little bit more easy because you don't have those restraints, like
Yes.
traditional restraints?
Yes. Yeah. I've thought about that a lot. I feel like I approach design not having been taught formally. I feel like I do approach design with a little bit more innocence, and so I admittedly don't always know all the references or all the terminology, and in a way I do find that freeing because I'm just creating and I'm not having to think so much about like, has this been done before, or those sorts of questions. So definitely that has been something that I've thought of and felt along the way.
If you never think, am I doing it right or wrong? Like if you don't know the concepts, or that's cool that you think that way. I would just think the opposite, like I'm doing it wrong. I don't know, like.
I guess maybe I don't know if I'm doing it right or wrong, and maybe that's not the point. I guess it goes back to what I shared a little bit with graphic design as instinct. So I rely on those instincts a lot as well, and yeah, maybe they aren't. I don't know what's right. I guess it's like, and who determines that? Yeah.
Yeah, so going back to the example of the book, that project where you have somebody helping to choose what they think the final outcome should be,
Yeah.
you can only assume that that's not the case in most projects that you have. So my question is, how do you decide when something is done, or it sort of fits all that criteria and you're ready to publish? How do you decide something's ready?
I think in a lot of cases it's when it, I guess, satisfies this sort of conceptual criteria that I have, which I think is quite simple. It's just sort of what I shared, with the link between the concept and the visual, and kind of sometimes that's all for me that's needed, is just that sort of interplay. So yeah, I don't.
Does the instinct piece come in? Because I can only imagine that there are several occasions where you have a project where you have two pieces that maybe convey the same concept. You have to maybe use your instinct there to choose between the two.
Usually I don't choose. The way that I share, and I guess mostly on Instagram, is often with multiples. So it's usually always a carousel. So instead of choosing one, it's like I guess I didn't share any of those many examples like that, but often it can be multiples where I'm looking at different concepts slightly different ways, or sequentially. So like with some of the repetition work, or repetition work that then goes into reduction and then goes back into repetition. It's more sequential. So yeah, I guess for this body of work, like the independent self-initiated work, it's like, I guess not choosing one or the other. It's more having a concept and then sort of going on a journey with it a little bit, whether that's sequentially or in terms of multiples and looking at it a few different ways. Or it's taking a phrase like "take your time" and then doing a concept and a design with that, and then coming back to that months later and doing something different. Yeah.
Do you have time for another question?
Sure.
Person with a white hat.
So it seems like by defining a set of rules and constraints, you've also defined a signature style. I mean, there's definitely a common thread in everything you do. And so then going back to the day job, how do you handle working with clients and having to respect their vision and create their identities without imposing your style on them?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can't I can't impose this style, and wouldn't want to, I guess. I've been, designing long enough, and I know I haven't shared any of that other, client or corporate work. So, but I feel like I've been designing long enough to, to kind of to navigate that, and so I'm used to working directly with clients, and so what translates there is not necessarily in my visual style, but it's the thinking style, and it's the quest for purpose and meaning again, and so working with a client to figure out what that means to them, and then going in that direction. So yeah, it wouldn't be imposing the visual, but it would be taking some of the thought process and the strategy, and weaving that into a client relationship, or to those sorts of projects.
Last question. Okay.
What's your exit strategy? I'm just kidding. I just wonder if you have like a vision for where this is going to go or end up someday, or will you sort of find that out along the way? Will you reach sort of a design nirvana one day? What's going to happen?
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, I guess the simple answer is I'm not sure. I know I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it enough that it's been a pretty big part of my life, and really outside of normal working hours for the most part, and still having a family, and so a lot to balance, but there's enough passion there and enough interest there that I kind of can't, at least for the moment, sort of can't stop creating in a way, and exploring. I think I think again, going back to the self-taught part, I think it's a way, I finally feel like I'm making discoveries and sort of, having some breakthroughs for me in terms of my visual language, I guess, and it's been inspiring to me enough to want to kind of keep going and just to see where it goes. So I think that's all I know at this point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.